Please, good sir, I beseech you, as a man of science, nay, as a man of reason, you mustn't stifle my research at this critical juncture. You have no idea how close I am to finding a cure for this blasted pestilence. I need only a handful of live subjects to complete my research. The plague doctor's emphatic pleas fell on deaf ears, as a stone-faced researcher took notes on his latest pontifications. The doctor, whom these clods had reduced so rudely to a mere number, SCP-049, banged his gloved fist up against the wall. And to think he once thought of these men as intellectual equals, fellow travelers on the road to scientific enlightenment. What a positively sick joke. Before the doctor got another chance to appeal for his right to experiment, the researcher left him alone once more. A truly sad state of affairs. Nobody appreciated a true scientist in this day and age. It was sure to be another day of languishing alone in his cell, wishing he had the capacity to do more. So he was surprised as anyone when the alarm started going off, and the door of his cell swung open automatically. The plague doctor stepped out of his cell and into the hall, where many other humanoid anomalies were roaming, confused as to why they'd been suddenly released. What was happening? As it turned out, what was happening was one of the most brutal Chaos Insurgency raids the staff of Site-19 had ever seen. It had been planned immaculately. You see, guards rotate semi-regularly at Site-19 due to the high-pressure nature of the job. Lots of deaths and mental breakdowns, as you probably correctly predicted. Even the administrative staff of the SCP Foundation are only human. Well, mostly anyway. So they're not immune to little oversights here and there. And it's in those oversights that expertly trained Chaos Insurgency infiltration agents make their living. No less than 15 of them had been working undercover in Site-19 for just over 2 weeks, and they did a fine job of lowering the metaphorical drawbridge for a heavily armed invasion force. The guards who weren't plants were quickly murdered by the infiltrators, and even some of the on-site task forces were quickly overwhelmed and gunned down by the high-precision rifles of the Chaos Insurgency's finest. While the frontliners were distracted by the sudden assault, the infiltrators found their way to the site's security control room and massacred everyone inside. Opening every single door in the site was as simple as putting in a few stolen key codes and flipping a few carefully remembered switches. Consequently, while Foundation agents and Chaos Insurgency mercenaries clashed sabers, high-priority anomalies like SCP-049 simply wandered the facility, watching the calamity unfold within. The Foundation was beset on all sides, shot at by heavily armed maniacs, and attacked from within by the numerous roaming anomalous entities that were eager to get their hands on Foundation personnel. Definitely not an ideal situation, to say the least. The Plague Doctor only had one thing on his mind, though. This definitely won't do my research any good, unless I can escape and find my way to a suitable laboratory. Oh, now there's an idea. But his scientific fantasies were soon interrupted by a Chaos Insurgency soldier swinging the butt of his M4 carbine into his avian exoskull with a supremely unpleasant crack. The doctor was dazed by it momentarily, the pain coming at him like a thunderclap, but the insurgent never got the chance to take another swing. Before the insurgent could do anything, the Plague Doctor lunged out with practiced speed, grasping him by the throat. Immediately everything went black, and the insurgent's limp corpse collapsed to the ground. Serves him right, the doctor internally mused. Soldiers attacking medics is violating even the most basic rules of gentlemanly warfare. Then another flash of immense pain, as a different rifle butt collided with the back of his head. The doctor fell to one knee, feeling dizzy, but before he could retaliate, he felt the two sharp prongs of a cattle prod pressing up against his neck. The sudden rush of electricity surged through his neck, sending his muscles into a wave of involuntary spasms. The insurgents crowding around him chimed in with their own agonizing cattle prods, relentlessly shocking him until the flashes of white-hot pain soon became an oppressive blanket of total dark. Even on his most cantankerous days, the SCP Foundation had never treated him like this. When he eventually came to, he was still in darkness, standing upright, with high-tech shackles holding every limb in place. It was beyond uncomfortable for the poor Plague Doctor, but it succeeded in the task of keeping him under control.
He couldn't move an inch. There were muffled voices beyond the dark, beyond the confines of this new containment. The modulated gas mask voices of insurgents and something else. Faintly accented, oddly familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. Soon the voices were replaced by another sound, the grinding of crowbars levering nails out of cheap wood. With a creaking tumble, a rectangle of bright light opened up in front of him, populated by a number of silhouettes. On either side were Chaos insurgents in familiar tactical garb, and in between them stood a tall, well-groomed man with an expensive-looking purple smoking jacket and a pencil mustache. For a few fractions of a second, his face was a portrait of excitement, but as he took in the sight of the plague doctor standing before him, all the joy drained from his snooty countenance.
"What the hell am I looking at here?"
the man in the smoking jacket said. The doctor, indignant at such a response from the man who'd presumably ordered his assault, rasped,
"A man of science, good sir."
The man in the smoking jacket ignored him and continued to berate the Chaos insurgents, with an odd level of confidence for someone reprimanding trained cold-blooded killers.
"I wanted SCP-650, the startling statue, not this clownish Ren Fair cosplayer. What the hell did I pay you ruffians for? I was told you Chaos insurgents were the very best at this, and for your hefty price, I expect excellence."
The rant continued much like this, leaving everyone in attendance, the insurgents, the plague doctor, feeling thoroughly exhausted by him and unable to do anything about it. You see, this wasn't just any Chaos insurgency client, your average tin pot dictator or arms dealer. You know the type. This was the one and only Pascal Leggett, one of the most famous, or rather infamous, anart collectors in the game. He'd been a founding person of interest for years due to his dealings with the Chaos Insurgency and Marshall Carter and Dark Limited, all to the end of expanding his anart collection, but his vast wealth and connections had always shielded him from Foundation probes. For those unfamiliar with the subculture, anart, short for anomalous art, is exactly what it sounds like. Artistic projects with anomalous properties to give it that extra kick. One of the most popular groups of interest dealing in anart is the iconic Are We Cool Yet?, which, incidentally, had recently excommunicated Pascal Leggett for being an exceedingly wealthy, uptight square who really didn't represent the collective's rebellious ethos. And considering his response was to pay the Chaos Insurgency to raid Site-19 for a few pieces for his own private collection, costing him millions of dollars and both groups many lives, it was safe to say he wasn't taking it well.
"Look, we got you that other statue and that thing killed 4 of our best guys, so how about we just call it even?" said one of the insurgents. "I'm sure you can have fun with bird brain here too."
Pascal tutted and reluctantly dismissed the hired guns. Having the plague doctor here definitely wasn't ideal, especially considering he wanted to host the ultimate anart exhibition to put Are We Cool Yet worthless Sommes-nous devenus magnifiques to shame. But he would make do with what he had. Perhaps he could say that 049 was a commentary on the ever-present nature of disease in mankind's life, and our forever archaic approach to it.
Yes, that would do nicely.
Needless to say, the plague doctor was infuriated by all this. The violence against his person, the kidnapping, the disrespect, and most of all, the interruption to his precious research, especially considering how close he'd gotten to finding a cure for the pestilence. But instead, he was soon spirited by a legion of heavily armed goons from his wooden box to a glass one in one of Leggett's many opulent hallways. There were other glass cases on either side of him, and more on the other side of the hall, all too reinforced for the plague doctor to even smash through it on his own. Damn it. Leggett's own private anart exhibition, probably wedged between his oversized dining room and his jewel-encrusted crapper. Occasionally, Pascal himself would jaunt down the hallway to gaze upon his new stolen anart pieces, and of course the plague doctor would try his best to reason with him.
"I am a patient man, Monsieur Leggett, but this is simply barbaric. By what right do you imprison me here? Is your intention to deprive the world, the entire human race, of my valuable medical breakthroughs? Could you live with that on your conscience, good sir?"
There was never any meaningful response. The plague doctor soon learned that Pascal Leggett didn't like his art interactive. It was simply meant to languish away in a glass box, being watched, being passively looked at. Those Chaos Insurgency louts hadn't even bothered to bring his notebook or medical bag, so he was without the tools to even perform his experiments. As loathed as he was to admit it, this was even worse than being locked up by the SCP Foundation. But all this wasn't entirely unfamiliar. There was something in the glass box across from the plague doctor that he vaguely recognized back from Site 19. He'd never seen it up close, but he'd heard researchers speaking about it, and even seen a few pictures. And such a strange construction it was. A peculiar, haphazard sculpture made from concrete, rebar, and spray paint. Quite ugly, in this humble doctor's opinion, but there was something oddly entrancing about it. And for reasons beyond the doctor's recollection, 4 of Leggett's men stood around the glass box in where it was being stored, always watching. The men were frequently switched in and out, as though they were watching in shifts, always fixing their gaze on its peculiar, malformed body. Maybe it was all the electrical shocks and knocks to the head, but he just couldn't remember why Pascal was having the piece so carefully observed. But he knew on some primal level that the secret to this would perhaps be the key to his own escape, if only he could remember. Still, time passed. Pascal drifted in and out, sometimes with guests. The plague doctor had learned not to speak. These animals could not be reasoned with. As a scientist, he would instead carefully observe until his observations bore fruit. He noticed that Pascal's guests, all people who looked equally as wealthy and pompous as Pascal himself, all seemed to look right over him, and instead focus on the ugly statue across the hall, still forever observed by any 4 of Pascal's men. Some of them looked actively nervous, just being in its presence. Curious, the plague doctor made a mental note of this, just as he did when Pascal gave his guests a reassuring pat on the shoulder and told them,
Please calm yourself. It's harmless while my personnel are keeping an eye on it.
Little by little, the plague doctor's memories of his infamous neighbor had begun to return. He knew what he must do to escape. Now all he needed to do was wait for the perfect moment. Soon enough, Pascal's mansion was filled with a bevy of Anart snobs from hither and yon, a private soiree to show off his new collection. They wandered the halls in 3-piece tuxedos and designer ballroom dresses, sipping champagne from imported crystal. All such lovely, refined, high society people. And if the good doctor's plan went off as he intended, they would all be such lovely, refined, high society corpses. The plague doctor waited until, mercifully, he and the 4 members of personnel watching the sculpture were the only ones left in the hallway. He'd been so good, so patient, that none of the men guarding the sculpture at present had ever heard him make a noise. He was so invisible to them that, in all likelihood, they probably didn't even notice he could make a sound. And that worked for his purposes just fine. Though in any case, if he wanted this to work, he would need to time his plan perfectly. Even a fraction of a second out of place and the whole thing would have dire consequences. Still, the doctor was still a Frenchman at heart. And as a Frenchman, he knew he would rather die nobly in the process of escape than remain captured by this worthless buffoon. He'd be sure to take as many of these men down with him in the process as he was able. The plague doctor exhaled deeply, drawing a lungful of air, then bellowed as loud as he possibly could. The sudden, unexpected noise was so shocking that it jogged the 4 watchers almost reflexively to turn and look at him. And in the split second that they did, the plague doctor closed his eyes. In the dark, time seemed to move slower, perhaps due to the doctor's keen focus, cultivated over many a century. He listened carefully to the sequence of sounds: glass shattering, 4 choked gasps in sequence, 4 brutal crunches, then nanoseconds later, more glass shattering. The plague doctor's eyes snapped open just in time. Just as predicted, the sculpture, being entirely unobserved, had smashed through its glass case, murdering all 4 members of personnel by snapping their necks, and then smashed through his own glass case to do the same to him. The plague doctor had cut it so close, in fact, that he opened his eyes to the face of the sculpture staring into his own, its concrete limbs wrapped around his neck. Very good timing indeed. With a sigh of relief, the plague doctor slipped out of the sculpture's concrete grasp and back down the hallway, keeping his gaze fixed on the sculpture the entire time. He'd heard it decimate Pascal's men. He certainly didn't fancy undergoing the same fate. The second the plague doctor backed around the corner, rendering the sculpture, or as the SCP Foundation called it, SCP-173 out of sight, he could hear terrified screaming coming from the other end of the hall. He was not a sadistic man, but the plague doctor would be lying if he told you he didn't take just a little bit of pleasure in hearing that sound. Somewhere else in the vast mansion of Pascal Leggett, the sculpture was slaughtering its way through servants and party guests, while the Plague Doctor searched for some kind of exit. Anyone who dared get in his way was given a swift and merciless touch of death, sending their body unceremoniously to the ground. Anyone in his way was preventing him from finding a cure for the pestilence, and thus endangering countless lives. It was, of course, regrettable to have to kill anyone, but some sacrifices must be made for the greater good of mankind. While it's not necessarily always regrettable per se. On his way out while the murderous rampage of SCP-173 seemed to distract anyone of note, the Plague Doctor just so happened to encounter a fleeing Pascal Leggett, hoping to find some kind of escape himself. It seemed that now fate was on his side once more. To have his jailer right here in the palm of his hand would be such a perfect parting gift. Funnily enough, Pascal was far more talkative to him now. He rattled off a rapid-fire series of threats, bribes, and pleas, claiming in the end that he never meant any harm. He was the one who freed the Plague Doctor from the SCP Foundation. They were on the same side here. All this was for the art. No offense was ever intended. Pascal Leggett simply lived for art.
Then die for it, good sir,
the Plague Doctor said. And with a single touch, Pascal's eyes rolled up into the back of his head, and he fell to the ground, dead. It was one of the few non-scientific deaths that he felt truly no guilt for. After some time searching, the screams around the rest of the mansion eventually went silent. That did wonders for his focus. It didn't take long for the Plague Doctor to locate an exit, a fine mahogany door with elaborate adornments befitting a man as gaudy as Pascal, and began strolling towards it, his chest swollen with pride and a sense of accomplishment. Then he blinked, and a few feet in front of him stood the sculpture. It was there so suddenly that the Plague Doctor fell backwards in shock, but he devoted everything to keeping an eye on that monstrosity. With everyone else in the mansion presumably dead at this point, it had now come back for him. It stood there staring silently, ready to exact the terrible price for freeing it as soon as the Doctor dared to blink. The Plague Doctor began crawling backwards down the hall, just wanting to put some distance between himself and the sculpture. As the seconds passed, he could feel his eyes drying out until the inevitable blink. The sculpture was standing right in front of him now, gazing down, almost mocking. It had closed the distance so quickly. If the Plague Doctor blinked again, he was sure that his eyes would never open again. All it had to do was wait as the seconds passed, and the Doctor began to feel his eyes drying up again. That subtle sting quickly grew into a nagging pain that could not be denied. Sooner or later, he was going to have to. Bang! The front door flew open, and in an instant the hallway was filled with heavily armed troops, all wearing the familiar black and gray of the SCP Foundation. The Plague Doctor had never been so relieved to see the organization that had kept him locked up for so many decades. For once they'd saved him from something even worse. Of course, the sculpture didn't say anything, but the disappointment of losing that one more victim seemed to radiate off of it like a lingering bad smell. The Plague Doctor willingly gave himself up, and heavy machinery was brought in to pick up SCP-173, with the help of the iPods to make sure it didn't try any funny business in transit. Pascal had gotten away with his shady dealings for years, but the brazen attack he funded against Site-19 was now enough for the Foundation to track him down. When his corpse was found in the halls of his own home with no obvious cause of death, we can happily tell you that nobody was disappointed. By the evening, the Plague Doctor was happy to be back in his cell. His research could continue here, and in time he knew that the personnel of the SCP Foundation would listen to reason and comply with his demands. After all, science marches on, regardless of who chooses to march with it. But he would forever feel a little nervous in Site-19 after that, knowing the concrete monster he was sharing the building with. He hoped that if ever there was another containment breach involving that thing, that it didn't feel like paying him a visit for old time's sake. Now go check out SCP-049 The Plague Doctor, everything you need to know, and SCP-173 Origin Story, How 173 Got to Site-19 for more on the two SCPs from today's original tale.